I stood in that sterile hospital room, watching the man who raised me struggle to breathe, and all I could think about was the day he looked me dead in the eye and said, "You were never supposed to be ours." 23 years had passed since those words shattered my world, and now here I was, the only person left to make the decision about his life support. The irony wasn't lost on me. The daughter they forgot, the child they abandoned, had become the guardian angel they never knew they needed. But how do we get here? How does a family go from Sunday morning pancakes and bedtime stories to a secret so devastating it would take decades to heal? This is the story of love, loss, and the kind of forgiveness that only comes when you've walked through hell and decided to build something beautiful from the ashes. Thank you so much for tuning in to hear this incredible story. Before we dive deeper into this emotional journey, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. And I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop a comment below and let me know your city or country. Your support means everything. And now, let's continue with this remarkable tale. My name is Sarah, though for the first 8 years of my life, I thought it was Sally. It's funny how memory works. Some details fade like watercolors in the rain, while others remain sharp enough to cut you decades later. I remember the smell of my mother's lavender perfume, the sound of my father's deep laugh echoing through our two-story colonial in suburban Connecticut, and the way the morning sun would stream through our kitchen windows during those perfect Saturday breakfasts. Margaret and James Coleman were the kind of parents every child dreams of having. Mom was a kindergarten teacher with infinite patience and a smile that could make you believe in magic. Dad was an insurance adjuster who somehow made even the most boring dinner table conversations feel like grand adventures. They had been trying to have children for 7 years before I came into their lives, and they treated every day with me like a gift they never expected to receive. I was different from them in obvious ways. My dark skin against their pale complexion, my tight curls versus their straight hair, my full lips and broad nose in contrast to their narrow features. But in our house, those differences were never discussed. I was simply their daughter, their miracle baby, their everything. The Colemans had adopted me when I was just 6 months old through a private agency. They told me this story countless times throughout my childhood, always with tears in their eyes and love in their voices. They said they chose me the moment they saw my picture, that they knew I was meant to be theirs. And I believed them completely. Our life was beautifully ordinary. Soccer practice on Tuesdays and Thursdays, piano lessons on Saturdays, family movie nights with homemade popcorn and mom's famous hot chocolate. I excelled in school, made friends easily, and never questioned why I looked nothing like the people who loved me most in the world. But there were moments, tiny fractures in our perfect facade, that I didn't understand at the time. The way conversations would stop when I entered a room, the hushed phone calls Mom would take in the basement, the locked filing cabinet in Dad's office that was strictly off limits, the way both my parents would sometimes look at me with an expression I couldn't quite name, love mixed with something that looked almost like fear. When I was 7, I asked Mom why I looked different from her and Dad. She sat me down on our floral couch, the one that smelled like vanilla candles in Sunday afternoons, and explained adoption in the gentlest terms a child could understand. She told me that sometimes babies grow in different mommies' tummies, but they're meant to be with different families. She said I was special because they got to choose me, that I was wanted in a way that made me extra precious. I accepted this explanation completely. Why wouldn't I? These people adored me, sacrificed for me, celebrated every small victory in my life as if it were their own. When I scored my first goal in soccer, Dad literally jumped over the bleacher railing to run onto the field and hug me. When I lost my first tooth, Mom made such a production of the tooth fairy's visit that I found glitter in my hair for weeks. But perfect families, I've learned, are often the ones hiding the darkest secrets. The summer I turned 8, something changed. It was subtle at first, the kind of shift that children feel in their bones, without being able to articulate it. Mom started having headaches that kept her in bed for hours. Dad began working later, his usual enthusiasm replaced by a distracted worry that followed him like a shadow. It started with the phone calls, late-night whispered conversations that would end abruptly when I appeared in the hallway asking for water or complaining about a bad dream. Mom would smile too brightly and tuck me back into bed, but I could feel the tension radiating from her like heat from pavement in summer. Then came the visitors, a woman in a gray suit, who arrived on a Tuesday afternoon while I was at school. When I got home, Mom was crying in the kitchen, staring at a stack of papers scattered across our dining table. She quickly gathered them up when she heard my footsteps, forcing that same too bright smile. Just grown-up stuff, sweetheart, she said, pulling me into a hug that lasted longer than usual. Nothing for you to worry about. But I was 8, not stupid. I knew something was wrong. The breaking point came on a Thursday in August. I was playing in our backyard, having an elaborate tea party with my stuffed animals, when I heard raised voices coming from inside the house. This was unusual, because Mom and Dad never fought, at least not where I could hear them. Curiosity got the better of me, and I crept closer to the open kitchen window. We can't keep pretending this isn't happening, Margaret. Dad's voice was strained, desperate in a way I'd never heard before. She's 8 years old, James. She's our daughter. How do we explain this to her? I don't know, but we have to figure it out. The agency made a mistake, a big one. And now her biological family wants her back. My world tilted sideways. Biological family? Back? The words didn't make sense in the context of my safe, secure life. They can't just take her, Mom whispered. We've raised her. We love her. She doesn't even know them.
The law is complicated, Maggie, and there are circumstances, things about how the adoption was handled that could work against us.
I pressed closer to the window, my heart hammering so loud I was sure they could hear it. What aren't you telling me, James? There was a long pause, and when Dad spoke again, his voice was barely audible. The birth mother never actually signed the papers. The agency forged her signature, and now she's clean. She's got her life together, and she wants her daughter back. Our Sarah. Her real name is Amara. The world seemed to stop spinning. The birds stopped singing. Even the wind held its breath. Mom's sob cut through the silence like a knife. So what does this mean? We just hand over our child to strangers? She's not a stranger, Margaret. She's Sarah's mother. Her real mother.
I'm a real mother?
The words exploded from Mom with a fury I'd never witnessed. I'm the one who walked the floors with her when she had colic. I'm the one who taught her to ride a bike, who bandaged her scraped knees, who read her stories every single night for 8 years. DNA doesn't make you a parent. Love does. I know that, you know that, but the courts might see it differently. I stumbled backward, my legs suddenly unable to support me. My tea party lay forgotten as I ran to the old oak tree at the back of our property and climbed as high as I could, as if height could somehow lift me above this nightmare. Amara, my real name was Amara. I had a biological mother who wanted me back. Everything I thought I knew about my life was a lie. The next few weeks passed in a haze of whispered conversations, legal meetings, and a tension so thick I could taste it. Mom tried to maintain normalcy, but her smiles never reached her eyes anymore. Dad became increasingly withdrawn, spending long hours in his office with the door closed. I pretended I didn't know anything, but the knowledge sat in my chest like a stone, growing heavier each day. I started having nightmares about strangers coming to take me away from the only family I'd ever known. I became clingy, following Mom around the house like a lost puppy, as if my constant presence could somehow prevent the inevitable. Then, on a gray September morning, Mom sat me down for the talk. We were in my bedroom, surrounded by all the evidence of my childhood, stuffed animals, art projects, photographs of our family vacations. Mom perched on the edge of my bed, her hands shaking as she tried to find the words. Sarah, sweetheart, we need to talk about something important. Something that might be confusing and scary, but I need you to know how much Daddy and I love you. My 8-year-old heart already knew what was coming, but hearing it out loud was like being punched in the stomach. You know how we've always told you that you're adopted, that you came to us in a very special way. I nodded, not trusting my voice.
Well,
Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes. And it turns out there was a mistake made when you came to live with us. Your birth mother, your first mommy, she never actually agreed to let you be adopted. The words hit me like physical blows. She didn't want to give me away? Mom's eyes filled with tears. No, baby. She didn't, and now she wants you to come home to her. But I am home. This is my home. You're my mommy. I know, sweetheart. I know, and you'll always be my daughter, no matter what happens. But there are rules, laws that grown-ups have to follow, and we might not have a choice about this. I threw myself into her arms, clinging to her with desperate strength. I don't want to go. I want to stay here with you and Daddy. Please don't make me go. Mom held me while I sobbed, her own tears falling into my hair. We're going to fight for you, Sarah. We're going to do everything we can to keep our family together. But I need you to be brave, Okay, can you be brave for me? I wanted to be brave. I wanted to be the strong little girl my parents had always told me I was. But how do you be brave when your entire world is crumbling around you? 3 weeks later, I met Keisha Washington for the first time. The meeting took place in a sterile office building downtown, supervised by social workers and lawyers. Mom and Dad sat on one side of a long conference table, their hands clasped so tightly their knuckles were white. Across from them sat a woman who looked like an older version of me. Keisha was 26 years old, though she looked older. Her hair was natural, worn in a short afro that framed her face beautifully. She had my eyes, the same dark brown with flecks of gold. She wore a simple blue dress and kept her hands folded in her lap, but I could see them trembling. "Hello, Amara," she said softly, and the sound of that name, my real name, sent shivers down my spine. I hid behind Mom's chair, suddenly shy, in a way that was completely unlike me. This woman was a stranger, but looking at her was like looking into a mirror that showed me my future. "Can you come sit with me for a few minutes?" Keisha asked. "I've been waiting so long to meet you." The social worker, a kind woman named Mrs. Peterson, gently encouraged me to move closer. I reluctantly took a seat across from Keisha, my 8-year-old legs swinging nervously under the table. "You're so beautiful," Keisha whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You look just like I did when I was your age. Do you know who I am?" I nodded, my voice barely above a whisper. "You're my birth mother." "I'm your mother, baby. I'm your mama, and I've missed you every single day for the past 8 years." The room fell silent, except for the sound of muffled crying. I looked back at Mom and Dad, confusion written all over my face. How was I supposed to have two mothers? How was I supposed to understand any of this? Keisha reached into her purse and pulled out a worn photograph. "This is a picture of you when you were born. I only got to hold you for 2 hours before they took you away." The photo showed a tiny baby with a head full of dark hair, wrapped in a pink blanket. Keisha looked so young in the picture, barely more than a child herself. "I was 17 when you were born," she continued, her voice thick with emotion. "I was addicted to drugs, living on the streets, and I thought I was doing the right thing by letting someone else raise you, but I never signed those papers. Amara, I never agreed to give you up permanently." "Then why did they take me?" I asked, my child's logic trying to make sense of an impossibly complex situation. "Because some people lied. They told me you were going to a temporary foster family while I got clean. They said I could get you back when I was ready, but they lied, baby. They sold you to a family who wanted a baby, and they forged my signature on papers I never even saw." I looked at Mom and Dad, searching their faces for confirmation or denial, but they just looked broken, defeated by circumstances beyond their control. "We didn't know," Dad said quietly. "We were told you were legally available for adoption. We would never have taken you if we'd known the truth." "I know," Keisha said, her voice surprisingly gentle. "I don't blame you for loving her. How could you not? She's perfect, but she's my daughter, and I've spent 8 years getting clean, getting my life together, so I could be the mother she deserves." The meeting lasted 2 hours, but it felt like a lifetime. When it was over, I was more confused than ever. I had two mothers who both loved me, two families who both wanted me, and no idea how any of this could possibly work out. What followed was 6 months of legal hell that no 8-year-old should ever have to experience. Court dates, psychological evaluations, supervised visits, and a parade of lawyers and social workers who all claimed to have my best interests at heart. The media picked up the story, and suddenly our private family crisis became public entertainment. Adoption gone wrong, and the fight for baby Sarah became headlines that followed me wherever I went. Reporters camped outside our house, tried to interview me at school, and turned my childhood into a cautionary tale about the adoption system. Mom and Dad hired the best lawyer they could afford, but it quickly became clear that the law was not on their side. The adoption had been fraudulent from the beginning, which meant I had been living with them illegally for 8 years. No matter how much they loved me, no matter how well they had cared for me, the courts were likely to side with my biological mother. During this time, I started having regular visits with Keisha. These meetings took place at a family center downtown. Always supervised, always awkward. She would bring me gifts, books about African American history, dolls that looked like me, clothes in bright colors that Mom never would have chosen. "I want you to know where you come from," Keisha would say, showing me pictures of my grandparents, my aunts and uncles, cousins I'd never met. "You have a whole family that's been waiting to love you." These visits were emotionally exhausting. I would come home confused and conflicted, torn between loyalty to the parents who raised me and curiosity about this other life I might have had. Mom would help me with my homework, tuck me into bed, and I could see the fear in her eyes that this might be one of our last nights together. The hardest part was seeing how the stress was destroying my parents. Dad lost weight and started going gray, seemingly overnight. Mom began taking medication for anxiety and would sometimes lock herself in the bathroom to cry where she thought I couldn't hear her. I started acting out at school, getting into fights, talking back to teachers, struggling with assignments that had never been difficult before. My grades plummeted. I couldn't concentrate on anything except the terrifying possibility that I might be taken away from everything I'd ever known. My best friend Emma tried to understand, but how do you explain something this complicated to another 8-year-old? Can't you just choose where you want to live? She asked one day during recess. If only it were that simple. The court date was set for March 15th. As that day approached, the tension in our house became unbearable. Mom stopped sleeping. Dad started drinking more than usual. And I began to realize that no matter what the judge decided, my childhood as I knew it was over. The night before the hearing, Mom came into my room after I was supposed to be asleep. She sat on the edge of my bed and stroked my hair in that gentle way she'd done since I was a baby. "Sarah, I need to tell you something important." I sat up, sensing the gravity in her voice. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that being your mother has been the greatest privilege of my life. You have brought us more joy than we ever thought possible. And nothing, not a judge, not a piece of paper, not anything, can ever change the fact that you are our daughter." "Are they going to make me go away?" I asked, the question I'd been too afraid to voice for months. Mom's voice broke. "I don't know, sweetheart. I hope not. But if they do, I need you to remember something. Love doesn't end just because people can't live together. No matter where you are, no matter what happens, Daddy and I will always love you. And maybe this other family will love you too. But I don't want another family. I want this family."
I know, baby. I know.
We held each other and cried until we both fell asleep in my single bed, surrounded by the stuffed animals and picture books that had defined my childhood. The next morning, we drove to the courthouse in complete silence. The building was enormous and intimidating, with marble floors that echoed our footsteps and serious-looking people in dark suits rushing back and forth. In the courtroom, I sat between Mom and Dad, wearing my best dress, the blue one, with white flowers that Mom had bought me for Easter. Across the aisle, Keisha sat with her lawyer and what I would later learn was my grandmother, a woman who looked at me with such intense longing, it made my stomach hurt. The hearing lasted 4 hours. Lawyers presented evidence, social workers gave testimony, and experts talked about the best interests of the child, as if I weren't sitting right there listening to every word. Finally, the judge asked to speak with me privately in her chambers. Judge Martinez was a small woman with kind eyes and gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her office was less intimidating than the courtroom, with family photos on her desk and children's drawings taped to her bookshelf. "Sarah, do you understand what's happening here today?" I nodded. "Everyone's trying to decide who I have to live with." "That's right. And I know this is very confusing and scary for you. Can you tell me how you're feeling about all of this?"
"I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings," I said carefully. "Both mommies love me, and I love them both. But Margaret and James are the only parents I remember. They taught me everything I know. They're my family."
Judge Martinez leaned forward. "What about Keisha? How do you feel about her? She seems nice, and she looks like me. But she's like someone I just met. Even though she's my real mother, Margaret feels more like my real mother. You know?" The judge nodded thoughtfully. "Sarah, if you could choose, what would you want to happen?" The question I'd been dreading, the one that felt impossible to answer without betraying someone I cared about. "I want to stay with Mom and Dad, but I want to see Keisha sometimes too. Like how my friend Emma sees her dad on weekends after her parents got divorced. Can families do that when people aren't married?" Judge Martinez smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from any adult in months. "Sometimes they can, sweetheart. Sometimes they can." When we returned to the courtroom, Judge Martinez took her time before speaking. The silence stretched so long I could hear my own heartbeat. "This is one of the most difficult cases I've had to rule on in my 20-year career," she began. "We have a child who has been loved and cared for by 2 families, both of whom have her best interests at heart. We have biological parents whose rights were violated through fraudulent practices, and adoptive parents who acted in good faith and have provided excellent care for 8 years. My hands were sweating. Mom reached over and squeezed my fingers. After careful consideration of all the evidence and testimony, and after speaking with Sarah herself, I am ruling that custody will be returned to the biological mother, Keisha Washington. The words hit like a physical blow. Mom gasped, and I heard Dad make a sound like he'd been punched in the stomach. Across the aisle, Keisha burst into tears of relief. But the judge wasn't finished. However, I am also ordering that Margaret and James Coleman be granted generous visitation rights, including overnight visits every other weekend and extended time during school holidays. Furthermore, I am strongly encouraging both families to work together in Sarah's best interests and to consider joint counseling to help navigate this transition. Additionally, I am ordering a gradual transition period of 6 months, during which Sarah will slowly increase her time with Miss Washington while maintaining her current living situation. This will give everyone time to adjust and ensure that Sarah's emotional well-being is protected throughout this process. It wasn't the outcome any of us had hoped for, but it wasn't the worst-case scenario either. I wouldn't be ripped away from Mom and Dad overnight, and they wouldn't disappear from my life completely. As we left the courthouse, Keisha approached us cautiously. "Margaret, James, I know this is hard. I know you don't want to give her up, but maybe we can be a family together. Different kinds of families, but still family. Sarah needs all of us." Mom looked at Keisha for a long moment, and I saw something shift in her expression. Not acceptance exactly, but maybe the beginning of understanding. "She'll always be our daughter too," Mom said quietly. "Always."
"I know," Keisha replied, "and I'm grateful for everything you've given her. I hope someday you can forgive me for taking her from you."
"You're not taking her," Dad said, speaking for the first time since the ruling. "You're just sharing her, and maybe that's what she needs." The transition was harder than anyone expected. Moving between 2 homes, 2 families, 2 completely different worlds was exhausting and confusing. At Mom and Dad's house, I was still Sarah, who played piano and ate organic vegetables and had a bedtime of 8:30. At Keisha's apartment, I was Amara, who learned to braid hair and cook collard greens, and stayed up late listening to stories about ancestors I'd never known existed. Both families tried their best, but the first few months were rough. I would cry for Mom when I was at Keisha's house, and feel guilty about missing Keisha when I was back in my old bedroom in Connecticut. I felt like I was living 2 separate lives, never fully belonging to either one. Keisha lived in a small apartment in Hartford with my grandmother, who everyone called Nana. The neighborhood was nothing like the suburban streets I was used to. More diverse, more urban, with sounds and smells and rhythms that were completely foreign to me. But it was also vibrant and alive in a way that felt exciting once I got used to it. Nana was nothing like the grandparents I'd imagined. She was fierce and funny, with silver hair and hands that were always busy, cooking, cleaning, braiding someone's hair, or working on one of her many craft projects. She called me baby girl, and told me stories about our family that went back generations. "Your great-great-grandmother was a slave in South Carolina," she would say while we sat on the front stoop in the evenings. "But she learned to read in secret, and she taught all her children to read too. Education was the one thing nobody could take away from us, no matter how hard they tried." These stories fascinated me. At Mom and Dad's house, history was something you learned about in textbooks. Here it was personal, immediate, part of who I was supposed to be. But integrating these 2 identities was complicated. I remember one particularly difficult incident when I was 9. I had spent the weekend with Keisha and came back to Connecticut with my hair braided in intricate patterns that Nana had spent hours creating. When I walked into school Monday morning, some of my classmates stared and whispered. One girl asked if I was trying to look more black now. I came home in tears asking Mom to take out the braids immediately. "I just want to look normal," I sobbed. Mom sat me down and gently worked out each braid while I cried. "Sweetheart, there's nothing abnormal about how you look. Your hair is beautiful, no matter how you wear it. But I understand this is confusing. Why can't I just be one thing?" I asked. "Why do I have to be both Sarah and Amara?" "Because you are both," Mom said simply. "You're Sarah Coleman, who loves piano and soccer and reads 3 grade levels above her age. And you're also Amara Washington, who comes from a long line of strong, beautiful women who survived incredible hardships. Both of those girls are you, and both of them are wonderful." It would take me years to truly understand what she meant. As I got older, The logistics of my split life became routine, but the emotional complexity only deepened. Middle school was particularly challenging. I was attending a predominantly white private school near mom and dad's house, but spending weekends and holidays in an urban, predominantly black community with Keisha's family. The cultural differences weren't just about race. They were about class, education, values, and expectations. Mom and dad pushed me academically, signing me up for test prep courses and advanced classes. They talked about college from the time I was 10 years old, making it clear that education was not just important, but essential. Keisha wanted me to succeed academically too, but she also wanted me to be proud of where I came from. She enrolled me in an African dance class and took me to Black history museums. She taught me about systemic racism and explained why representation mattered. She wanted me to be strong, to be proud, to never let anyone make me feel less than because of the color of my skin. These weren't conflicting messages exactly, but they created different pressures and expectations that I struggled to navigate. At school, I was often the only black student in my advanced classes. Teachers would sometimes ask me to speak for my entire race when discussing slavery or civil rights, as if I were an expert on the black experience simply because of my skin color. But the truth was, I often felt like I wasn't black enough for those conversations. I lived in the suburbs, vacationed at Martha's Vineyard, and attended cotillion classes. My lived experience was privilege, not struggle. When classmates made racist comments, I didn't always recognize them as such, because I hadn't been taught to see the world through that lens until I was older. At the same time, when I was in Keisha's neighborhood, I sometimes felt like I wasn't black enough there either. I talked white, some kids said. I didn't know the latest music or fashion trends. I was bougie, a word I learned meant trying to be better than where you came from. The summer I turned 13, this tension came to a head. I was spending a week with Keisha when a group of girls from the neighborhood invited me to hang out. I was excited. I'd been trying to fit in with them for years, but the afternoon went badly. They wanted to shoplift from a local store, and when I refused, they called me a white girl in black skin and said I thought I was better than them. I came home crying, asking Keisha why I couldn't just be normal. "Baby, there's no such thing as normal," she said, holding me while I sobbed. "Every person in this world is trying to figure out where they belong. The difference is, you get to belong in more places than most people. That's not a burden, that's a gift." It doesn't feel like a gift. It feels like I'm always pretending to be someone I'm not. Then stop pretending. Be exactly who you are, all of who you are. Don't try to fit into other people's boxes. Make your own box. It was good advice, but easier said than done. By high school, I had settled into a rhythm with my two families, but new challenges emerged. I was academically successful, playing varsity soccer, and involved in student government. From the outside, I looked like I had it all figured out. Inside, I was struggling with questions about identity, belonging, and what my future would look like. The biggest challenge came during my junior year, when I started dating. I had developed a crush on a boy named Michael, a sweet, smart white kid from my AP history class. When I told mom and dad about him, they were supportive and wanted to meet him. But when I mentioned Michael to Keisha, her reaction was very different. "A white boy," she said, her voice tight with concern. "Are you sure about this, Amara? His name is Michael, and yes, I'm sure. Why does it matter what color he is?" "Because the world sees color, baby girl, even when we don't want it to. Dating outside your race comes with complications you might not be ready for." "But I'm already outside my race," I pointed out. "I'm black, but I've been raised in a white family. What race am I supposed to date within?" Keisha sighed, and I could see the pain in her eyes. "I know this is complicated for you. I know I can't undo the first 8 years of your life, and I'm not trying to. But I want you to be prepared for the reality of what it means to be a black woman in this world." This conversation highlighted something I'd been trying to ignore, the fact that my two families had very different expectations for my life. Mom and dad saw my race as incidental to who I was. They raised me to believe that I could be anything, do anything, go anywhere. They saw the world as essentially fair and meritocratic. Keisha's worldview was more complicated. She had experienced discrimination in ways mom and dad never had. She wanted me to be successful, but she also wanted me to be realistic about the obstacles I might face. She wanted me to be proud of being black, not colorblind to it. These different perspectives created confusion in my dating life, my college planning, and my career aspirations. When I expressed interest in journalism, Mom and Dad encouraged me to aim for the New York Times or Washington Post. Keisha worried about whether I'd be able to break into those predominantly white institutions, and whether I'd be accepted there if I did. The summer before my senior year, this tension exploded into the biggest fight our blended family had ever had. It started with college applications. I had been accepted to several excellent schools, including 2 Ivy League universities. The full-ride scholarship to Yale was my top choice, and Mom and Dad were over the moon with pride. But when I told Keisha about my decision, she was quieter than I expected. Yale is a wonderful school, she said carefully. But have you considered Howard or Spelman, schools where you'd be surrounded by other young black women who are just as smart and ambitious as you are? Why would I go to a historically black college when I can go to Yale? I asked, not understanding why this was even a conversation. Because there's value in being around people who look like you, who understand your experience without you having to explain it all the time. My experience is different from other black women, though. I was raised by white parents. I don't think I'd fit in at a black college any better than I fit in anywhere else. Keisha's face hardened. Is that what you think? That you don't fit in with black people?
That's not what I meant.
It's exactly what you meant. You think you're better than us. You think being raised by white people makes you superior to black people who were raised by their own families. The accusation stung because there was a kernel of truth in it. I had sometimes felt like my upbringing gave me advantages that other black kids didn't have. I had been taught to speak properly, to navigate white spaces comfortably, to see myself as belonging in elite institutions. That's not fair, I said, my voice rising. I never asked for any of this. I never asked to be taken away from you and raised by white people. I never asked to feel like I don't belong anywhere.
You think I don't know that?
Keisha shot back. You think I don't regret every single day the circumstances that led to us being separated, but that doesn't mean you get to reject your blackness just because it's inconvenient. I'm not rejecting anything. I'm trying to make the best choices for my future. By surrounding yourself with white people and pretending you're one of them. By going to the best school I got into. The fight escalated from there, with both of us saying things we didn't mean. I accused her of being jealous of my opportunities. She accused me of being ashamed of where I came from. It ended with me storming out of her apartment and not speaking to her for 3 months. During this time, I threw myself into my senior year activities and college preparation. Mom and Dad tried to mediate, encouraging me to work things out with Keisha, but I was too hurt and angry to listen. The rift affected everyone. Family dinners became tense when the subject of Keisha came up. Nana called me several times, trying to bridge the gap, but I was too stubborn to apologize for what I saw as defending my right to make my own choices. The breaking point came in February of my senior year. I was at Mom and Dad's house, working on a scholarship essay, when Dad knocked on my bedroom door. Sarah, we need to talk. Something in his tone made my stomach drop. He looked older than I remembered, more fragile somehow. What's wrong? It's about Keisha. She's been trying to reach you for weeks. I know, I'm not ready to talk to her yet. She's sick, honey. Really sick. The words hit me like ice water. What do you mean sick? She has lupus. It's been getting worse. And she's been hospitalized twice in the past month. She didn't want us to tell you because she was hoping you two would work things out on your own. But we think you should know. The scholarship essay forgotten. I stared at Dad in shock. All the anger I'd been carrying for months evaporated, replaced by a crushing guilt and fear. Is she going to be okay? The doctors are doing everything they can. But Sarah, she's been asking for you. Whatever happened between you two, don't let pride keep you from making peace with her. Some things are more important than being right. That night, I drove to Hartford Hospital with Mom and Dad. Keisha looked so small in the hospital bed, connected to machines that beeped and hummed around her. When she saw me, her face lit up with a smile that made me realize how much I'd missed her. There's my baby girl, she whispered, reaching for my hand. I'm sorry, I said, the words tumbling out through tears. I'm so sorry for everything I said. I didn't mean any of it. Shh, it's okay. We both said things we didn't mean. That's what families do sometimes. They fight, and then they make up. Are you going to be okay? I'm going to fight as hard as I can. But Amara, I need you to know something. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of the woman you're becoming. And I'm proud that you're going to Yale. I was scared. That's all. Scared that you'd go off to this fancy school and forget about us. Forget where you came from. I could never forget you. Any of you. I know that now, But promise me something.
Anything.
Promise me that no matter how successful you become, no matter how far you go in life, you'll remember that you have a responsibility to lift others up with you. Your success isn't just for you, it's for everyone who couldn't get the opportunities you've had.
I squeeze her hand tighter. I promise.
I graduated valedictorian and went to Yale that fall, but the experience was different than I'd expected. For the first time in my life, I was completely on my own, without either of my families to help me navigate my identity. College was where I truly began to understand what Keisha had been trying to tell me. In classes on African American literature and history, I learned about experiences and perspectives that my privileged upbringing had shielded me from. I met black students from all different backgrounds, some from poverty, some from wealth, some from two-parent homes, some from single mothers, some who had struggled with identity questions similar to mine. Through conversations with classmates, professors, and mentors, I began to develop a more nuanced understanding of race, privilege, and belonging. I realized that my unique background, being black but raised by white parents, didn't make me less authentically black. It just made my black experience different from others. I also began to understand the ways that privilege had shaped my life in ways I hadn't recognized. The private schools, the test prep, the cultural capital that mom and dad had given me, these weren't just personal advantages, they were systematic advantages that most black children didn't have access to. This realization led me to volunteer with a mentoring program for first-generation college students, many of whom were black and Latino kids from backgrounds similar to what mine might have been if I'd stayed with Keisha. Working with these students helped me understand what Keisha had meant about having a responsibility to lift others up. During my sophomore year, I changed my major to journalism, with a focus on social justice reporting. I wanted to tell stories about inequality, about the achievement gap, about the ways that systemic racism affected real people's lives. It felt like a way to honor both of my upbringings, using the privileges I'd gained from mom and dad to shine light on issues that Keisha's community faced. Keisha's health had stabilized somewhat, though she still had good days and bad days. I called her every week and visited every month, and our relationship was stronger than it had ever been. She was proud of my academic success, but even prouder of the volunteer work and advocacy I was doing. "You're becoming the woman I always hoped you'd be," she told me during one visit. "Strong and smart, but also conscious of the world around you." Mom and dad were adjusting to this new version of me as well. At first, they were confused by my growing interest in racial justice issues. They worried that I was becoming angry or radical, but gradually, they came to understand that my advocacy work wasn't a rejection of them or the values they'd taught me. It was an extension of those values, the belief in fairness, education, and helping others that they'd instilled in me from childhood. After graduating from Yale, I landed a job at the Hartford Courant, covering education and social services. It wasn't the New York Times, but it was exactly where I wanted to be, reporting on issues that mattered in the communities where both of my families lived. My beat included stories about achievement gaps, school funding disparities, and social services, topics that felt deeply personal given my own background. I wrote about adoption reform, advocating for better oversight and support for both birth parents and adoptive families. I profiled successful programs that helped kids aging out of foster care. I investigated cases where the system had failed vulnerable children. This work earned me recognition within the journalism community, but more importantly, it felt meaningful. I was using my platform to amplify voices that often went unheard and to push for changes that could help other children avoid some of the trauma I'd experienced. During this time, I was also navigating my personal relationships. I had dated throughout college and my early 20s, but I struggled with trust and commitment issues that I eventually traced back to the disruption of my childhood. How do you learn to trust that people will stay in your life when your earliest experience was being separated from people who loved you? I went to therapy, something both of my family supported, though for different reasons. Mom and dad saw it as a practical tool for personal development. Keisha saw it as healing work that was necessary given the traumatic experiences I'd had. Through therapy, I began to understand that my childhood, while traumatic, had also given me unique strengths. I was adaptable, empathetic, and able to see situations from multiple perspectives. I was comfortable in diverse environments and skilled at building bridges between different communities. I also began to work through my feelings about the adoption system and the circumstances that had separated me from Keisha. For years, I had carried anger about the fraudulent practices that had led to my placement with mom and dad. But gradually, I came to see that anger is unproductive. What mattered was using my experience to help reform the system so other families wouldn't go through what we had. I was 28 and had just been promoted to senior reporter when I got the call that would change everything. It was a Tuesday morning in March, and I was at my desk working on a story about charter school funding when my phone rang. Sarah, this is Dr. Patterson from Hartford Hospital. I'm calling about Margaret Coleman. My heart stopped. Mom had been having some health issues. Nothing serious, we thought. Just routine checkups and some fatigue that we'd attributed to stress at work. What's wrong? She's had a stroke. A significant one. You need to come to the hospital immediately. The drive to the hospital felt like it took forever and no time at all. I found Dad in the ICU waiting room, looking older and more fragile than I'd ever seen him. He fell into my arms the moment he saw me.
I don't know what we're gonna do, he whispered. The doctors say there's been a lot of brain damage. She might not be the same.
For the next 3 days, we maintained a vigil at Mom's bedside. She was unconscious, connected to machines that breathed for her and monitored her vital signs. The doctors explained that even if she survived, she would likely need extensive care, possibly for the rest of her life. On the 4th day, Mom opened her eyes, but it quickly became clear that the stroke had taken a devastating toll. She couldn't speak clearly, couldn't move her right side, and seemed confused about where she was and who we were. The woman who had raised me, who had taught me to read and tied my shoes and cheered at every soccer game, was gone. In her place was someone who looked like her but seemed lost and frightened. Dad was heartbroken and overwhelmed. At 72, he was dealing with his own health issues and wasn't equipped to provide the level of care Mom would need. We talked about nursing homes and care facilities, but the thought of Mom in an institutional setting felt wrong to all of us. That's when Keisha made an offer that surprised everyone. Bring her to my house, she said when I called to update her on Mom's condition. I'm not working full-time anymore because of the lupus, and Nana's been wanting something to keep her busy. We can take care of her. Keisha, you can't be serious. You barely know her, and you have your own health issues to deal with. That woman raised my daughter for 8 years when I couldn't. She loved you and cared for you and gave you opportunities I never could have given you. How could I not help her when she needs it? The conversation that followed was unlike any our two families had ever had. Dad was initially resistant to the idea. How could he trust his wife's care to people who were essentially strangers? But as we talked through the practical realities, it began to make sense. Keisha's apartment was on the ground floor, which would be easier for Mom's wheelchair. Nana had experience caring for elderly relatives. The neighborhood had good public transportation and was close to Hartford Hospital for follow-up appointments. And perhaps most importantly, Mom would be surrounded by people who genuinely cared about her rather than overworked nursing home staff. After much discussion and planning, we decided to try it for a month to see how it worked. Moving Mom into Keisha's apartment was surreal. Here was the woman who had raised me, who represented everything stable and predictable about my childhood, being cared for by the woman who represented everything complicated and uncertain about my identity. But Nana, now 78 herself, took to caring for Mom with a tenderness that brought tears to my eyes. She would sit beside Mom's wheelchair for hours, talking to her in a gentle voice, brushing her hair, helping her with the simple tasks that had become monumental challenges. Your mama was good to our baby, Nana would say when I thanked her for her patience. Now it's our turn to be good to her. Keisha proved to be an excellent caregiver as well. Her experience managing her own chronic illness had given her insights into navigating the healthcare system, advocating for patients, and maintaining dignity in the face of physical limitations. Dad visited every day, initially staying for just short periods but gradually spending more and more time at the apartment. I watched in amazement as these 4 people, who had once been on opposite sides of a custody battle, slowly became a family. Dad learned to make Nana's cornbread recipe. Keisha taught him how to transfer Mom from her wheelchair to her bed safely. Nana and Dad discovered a shared love of crossword puzzles and would work on them together while Mom rested. Most remarkably, Mom seemed to recognize that she was in a safe place surrounded by people who cared about her. Though her speech remained limited, she would smile when Nana sang old gospel songs and would reach for Dad's hand when he read to her from the newspaper. For me, watching this unlikely family unit develop was both beautiful and painful. I felt guilty that I couldn't provide this level of care myself. My job required long hours and frequent travel, but I also felt grateful that Mom was receiving such loving attention from people who had every reason to harbor resentment toward our family. The arrangement that was supposed to last a month stretched into 6 months, then a year. Dad eventually moved into a small apartment in the same complex, so he could be close to Mom. I helped with expenses and medical appointments, but the day-to-day care was provided by Keisha and Nana. During this time, I got to know my birth family in a completely different way. I saw Keisha's strength in how she managed both her own illness and Mom's care. I witnessed Nana's wisdom in the gentle way she navigated conflicts and soothed everyone's anxieties. I observed their deep capacity for forgiveness and grace. I also saw Dad in a new light. Watching him accept help from people he had once viewed as adversaries showed me a humility and openness I hadn't seen before. He began to understand in a visceral way some of the challenges that Black families faced in dealing with healthcare systems and social services. 2 years into this arrangement, Dad's own health began to decline. He had been diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's disease, and while he was still functional, there were signs that his condition was progressing. One evening, as I was helping him organize his financial papers, he pulled out a manila folder I'd never seen before. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "Something about your adoption that we never told you." My heart started racing. After all these years, there were still secrets. "What kind of something?" "We knew," he said quietly. "Margaret and I knew that your birth mother hadn't consented to the adoption." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What do you mean you knew?" "The social worker at the agency told us there were some irregularities with the paperwork, but she assured us that everything would be straightened out. She said your birth mother was a drug addict who would never be able to care for you properly, and that we were saving you from a terrible life." I stared at him, struggling to process this information. "So you knew that the adoption was fraudulent, and you went through with it anyway?" "We wanted a child so desperately, Sarah. We had been trying for 7 years, and when they showed us your picture, we fell in love immediately. The social worker made it sound like we were rescuing you, like you needed us more than you needed her." "But she was your mother," I said, my voice rising. "She was 17 years old, and trying to get clean, and you took her baby based on lies." Dad's eyes filled with tears. "I know. I've regretted it every day since we found out the truth. When Keisha showed up wanting you back, part of me knew she was right. We had stolen 8 years of her life with you." "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I'm dying, Sarah. Maybe not tomorrow or next month, but soon, and I can't go to my grave with this secret. You deserve to know the truth, and Keisha deserves an apology." I left Dad's apartment that night feeling like my world had been turned upside down again. Everything I thought I knew about my adoption, about the choices that had shaped my life, was based on lies. The next morning, I went to Keisha's apartment early, before my usual visit with Mom. I found her in the kitchen making breakfast, and without preamble, I told her what Dad had revealed. Keisha listened without interruption, her face growing harder with each detail. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "I always suspected," she finally said. "The agency's story never made sense. They told me you were going to a temporary foster home, but they wouldn't let me visit or even know where you were. When I got clean and tried to find you, they said the records were sealed." "Are you angry? At them? At me?" I was angry for a long time, furious. But anger was eating me alive, and I had to choose between being angry and being your mother. I chose being your mother. "What do we do with this information now?" Keisha poured herself a cup of coffee and sat down across from me. "We do what we've been doing. We take care of each other. James is dying, and Margaret is already gone in all the ways that matter. Punishing them now won't give me back those 8 years, and it won't change the fact that they loved you and raised you well. How can you be so forgiving?" "Because holding on to anger hurts me more than it hurts them, and because you turned out to be an amazing woman, despite everything that happened. Maybe because of everything that happened." Dad's Alzheimer's progressed rapidly over the next year. The man who had once been sharp enough to handle complex insurance cases began forgetting basic things, where he put his keys, what day it was, sometimes even who I was. But in his lucid moments, he was determined to make amends. He wrote letters to Keisha, apologizing for the role he had played in separating her from me. He donated money to organizations that supported birth mothers and adoption reform. He asked me to help him find the social worker who had facilitated the fraudulent adoption so he could provide testimony about what had really happened. The hardest part was watching him with Mom. In his confusion, he sometimes forgot that she had had a stroke. He would try to have conversations with her the way they used to, growing frustrated when she couldn't respond the way he expected. But there were beautiful moments too. Sometimes he would sing to her, old songs from their courtship that seemed to be embedded in a part of his brain that the disease couldn't touch. She would smile and try to hum along, and for those few minutes they were the couple who had fallen in love 40 years earlier. Keisha and Nana were incredibly patient with Dad during this time. When he became agitated or confused, they would calm him with the same gentle presence they showed Mom. When he forgot where he was or who they would reintroduce themselves without judgment or frustration. Family takes care of family, Nana would say when I thanked her for her kindness. That's just what we do. Dad died on a Thursday morning in October, with Mom, Keisha, Nana, and me at his bedside. His last words were an apology to Keisha for taking me away from her, and to me for the deception that had shaped my childhood. The funeral was a reflection of the unusual family we had become. Mom was there in her wheelchair, unable to fully understand what was happening, but clearly sensing the sadness around her. Keisha and Nana sat with us in the family section, their presence no longer surprising to anyone who knew our story. At the reception afterward, people kept commenting on how remarkable it was that our families had come together despite our complicated history. I realized that what we had created wasn't just remarkable, it was necessary. We had all been broken by the circumstances of my adoption, but we had chosen to heal together rather than apart. After Dad's death, the question of Mom's care became more pressing. I was her legal guardian, but I was also traveling frequently for work and wasn't able to provide the daily care she needed. The obvious solution was to continue the arrangement with Keisha and Nana, but now it would be permanent rather than temporary. This decision required legal documentation, financial planning, and difficult conversations about end-of-life care. But it also represented something deeper, a full acceptance that our two families had become one family, bound together by love rather than blood or legal documents. I moved into a larger apartment in Hartford so I could be closer to everyone. The commute to my job was longer, but being able to see Mom daily and help with her care was worth it. I also began working on a book about adoption reform, using our family's story as a framework for discussing larger systemic issues. Nana was slowing down. She was now 82 and dealing with her own health issues. But she continued to be Mom's primary caregiver, treating her with a devotion that never ceased to amaze me.
Why do you do so much for her?
I asked Nana one day as I watched her carefully spoon-feed Mom her lunch. Because she did so much for you, Nana replied simply. She gave you a good life, baby girl. She taught you to be strong and smart and kind. How could I not love her for that? Keisha's lupus was also worsening. Some days she could barely get out of bed, but on her good days, she would sit with Mom and tell her stories about my childhood from her perspective, the mother who had watched from a distance as her daughter grew up. I used to drive by your school sometimes, she told Mom during one of these sessions. I would see Sarah playing on the playground, and I would think about how happy she looked. I hated that I wasn't the one making her happy, but I was grateful that someone was. Mom couldn't respond with words, but she would squeeze Keisha's hand, and I could see in her eyes that she understood. I began to realize that I had become the guardian angel Dad had mentioned in his final words, not just for Mom, but for all of them. I was the bridge between these two families who had once been enemies but had become something much more complicated and beautiful. I managed Mom's medical appointments and medications. I helped Nana with grocery shopping and housework. I drove Keisha to her doctor visits and advocated for her when healthcare providers weren't taking her symptoms seriously. I coordinated care, resolved conflicts, and made sure everyone's needs were being met. But they were also my guardian angels. Nana's wisdom guided me through difficult decisions. Keisha's perspective helped me understand parts of myself I'd never examined. Even Mom, in her limited way, continued to be a source of love and comfort. Mom lived for 3 more years after Dad's death. They weren't easy years. Her condition continued to deteriorate, and there were numerous hospitalizations and crises. But they were also years filled with unexpected grace and beauty. I watched Nana teach Mom to paint with watercolors, guiding her left hand, the one that still worked, across paper in gentle strokes that somehow created recognizable flowers and trees. I saw Keisha singing gospel songs to Mom in the evenings, their voices harmonizing in a way that seemed to transcend their physical limitations. I witnessed moments of pure joy, like when Mom smiled at a joke she understood, or when she successfully fed herself a spoonful of ice cream, or when she reached out to touch my face in a gesture that felt like blessing. But I also learned about the practical realities of caregiving, the exhaustion that comes from being constantly vigilant, the financial stress of medical bills and equipment, the grief of watching someone you love disappear piece by piece while their body continues to function. During this time, my book about adoption reform was published to critical acclaim. I was invited to speak at conferences and appeared on television programs discussing the need for better oversight of adoption agencies. The story of our family became a case study in both how the system could fail and how healing was possible even after tremendous trauma. The irony wasn't lost on me that the fraudulent adoption that had caused so much pain had ultimately led to a story that might help prevent similar pain for other families. Mom died on a quiet Sunday morning in April, exactly 5 years after Dad's stroke. She had been declining for several weeks, and we all knew the end was near. I had taken leave from work to be with her full-time during her final days. She died peacefully in her sleep, with Nana holding one hand and me holding the other. Keisha was in the kitchen making tea, and when she heard my soft cry, she came running. "She's gone," I whispered, and Keisha put her arms around both Nana and me as we cried together. The funeral service was held at the Methodist church Mom had attended for 30 years. The sanctuary was packed with people whose lives she had touched. Former students, teaching colleagues, neighbors, and friends, but the front row held the family she never could have imagined when she first decided to adopt a baby 40 years earlier. At the service, I gave a eulogy that tried to capture the complexity of Mom's legacy. She had been an imperfect person who made a decision based on incomplete information and questionable advice. But she had also been a loving mother who had given me opportunities and advantages that had shaped me into the person I became. Margaret Coleman taught me that love isn't about biology, I said to the congregation. It's about choice. She chose to love me every day for 32 years. She chose to see potential in a baby that others might have written off. She chose to fight for me when the system tried to take me away. And in the end, she chose to accept care from people she had once seen as adversaries, because she understood that love is bigger than our preconceptions about who belongs in our families. After the service, as we stood in the cemetery where Mom was being buried next to Dad, Keisha took my hand. "You know what she gave you that I never could have?" "What?" "The belief that you deserve to be anywhere you wanted to be. I would have raised you to be strong and proud, but I also would have taught you to be careful, to be aware of all the ways the world might try to limit you. She raised you to believe that no door was closed to you. And you taught me that strength and pride are just as important as believing in possibilities." "We both did what we needed to do," Keisha said, "and look how you turned out." Today, 10 years after Mom's death, I continue to live in Hartford, though my role has evolved. Nana passed away peacefully 2 years ago at the age of 87, and Keisha's lupus has progressed to the point where she now needs significant care herself. I have become her primary caregiver, just as she once cared for Mom. The circle is complete. The daughter who was taken away has returned to care for the mother who never stopped loving her. My book led to a career as an advocate for adoption reform. I work with lawmakers to create better oversight of adoption agencies, support for birth mothers, and resources for adoptive families. I speak at conferences about the importance of honesty and transparency in adoption processes. But my most important work happens at home, in the quiet moments when I help Keisha with her medications, or when we sit together watching old movies, or when she tells me stories about her childhood that help me understand where I come from. People often ask me if I'm angry about how my life unfolded. They want to know if I resent the deception that separated me from my birth mother, or if I'm bitter about the custody battle that disrupted my childhood, or if I feel burdened by the caregiving responsibilities I've taken on. The answer is complicated, like everything else about my story. Yes, there was trauma. Yes, there was loss. Yes, there were years of confusion and identity struggles that might have been avoided if the adoption had been handled differently. But there was also love. Tremendous, complicated, imperfect love from people who were trying to do their best in difficult circumstances. Margaret and James Coleman gave me educational opportunities, cultural experiences, and a sense of possibility that shaped my entire worldview. They taught me to read, to think critically, to believe in myself, and to see education as a pathway to freedom. Keisha Washington and her family gave me roots, heritage, and an understanding of resilience that has carried me through every challenge I've faced. They taught me about community, about the importance of lifting others up, and about the strength that comes from acknowledging and embracing all parts of your identity. Nana taught me about grace, about the kind of love that transcends biological connections and legal documents. She showed me that family is something you create through daily acts of care and commitment. I am who I am because of all of them. The fraud that brought me to the Colemans was wrong, but the love they gave me was real. The pain of being separated from Keisha was devastating, but the reunion that followed taught me about forgiveness and resilience. As I sit here today helping Keisha with her crossword puzzle while she rests in the recliner that used to be Mom's, I think about the words that started this story. I am the guardian angel that none of us saw coming, the daughter who was forgotten, then fought over, then lost, then found again. But the real miracle isn't that I came back to care for the people who raised me and the people who gave me life. The real miracle is that we all learned to see each other not as adversaries fighting over a child, but as flawed human beings trying to create something beautiful from the broken pieces of our lives. Love, I've learned, isn't about perfection. It's about showing up, day after day, for the people who matter to you. It's about choosing forgiveness over anger, understanding over judgment, and hope over bitterness. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it's about becoming the guardian angel that your family, all of your family, needs you to be. In the end, that's what family really is. Not the people who share your DNA, or the people whose names are on your birth certificate, but the people who choose to love you, care for you, and stand by you when everything else falls apart. I was blessed to have not one family, but two families who loved me that much. And now, as Keisha drifts off to sleep in her chair with the crossword puzzle still in her lap, I understand that the greatest privilege of my life has been the opportunity to love them back with the same fierce devotion they showed me. That's the real story of the white parents who forgot their black baby. It's not about forgetting at all. It's about remembering. Remembering that love is stronger than lies. That healing is possible even after tremendous trauma. And that sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones that nobody could have planned or predicted. It's about becoming the guardian angel that love creates, one small act of care at a time.